Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we begin Village Diary by Miss Reed, the second of the Fairacre novels. And in this novel, we meet Miss Reed's old college friend, Amy. January. As I have been given a large and magnificent diary for Christmas, 7 by 10 and nearly 2 inches thick, I intend to go to fill it in as long as my ardor lasts. Further than that, I will not go. There are quite enough jobs that a schoolmistress just must do without making this one a burden. Unfortunately, the thing is so colossal that I shan't be able to carry it with me, as the adorable Miss Gwendolyn Fairfax did hers, so that she always had something sensational to read on the train. It was a most surprising present, for Amy had given it to me. When we first taught together in London many years ago, we exchanged 2 hankies each, I remember, and since she cropped up again in my life a year or so ago, it has been bath salts on her side to make you realize, dear, that even if you are a school teacher, there is no need to let yourself go completely, and 2 hankies as before on mine. When Amy handed me this present, she remarked earnestly, "Try to use it, dear. Self-expression is such a wonderful thing and so vital for a woman whose life is, well, not exactly abnormal, but restricted." This smacked of Amy's latest psychiatrist to me, but after the first reaction of speechless fury, I agreed civilly and have had over a week savoring this bon mot with increasing joy. Mrs. Pringle, the school cleaner, told me yesterday that Miss Parr's old house at the end of the village has now been turned into 3 flats. The workmen have been there now for months. They arrived soon after her death, but I hadn't realized that that was what they were doing. A nephew of Miss Parr's now owns it and has the ground floor. A retired couple from Caxley evidently moved into the top floor this week, and a widower, I understand, has the middle flat. "A very nice man, too," Mrs. Pringle boomed menacingly at me. "Been a schoolmaster at a real posh school where the boys have to pay fees and get the cane for nothing. Not in his prime, of course, but as Mrs. Willett said to me at choir practice, there's many would jump at him." Mrs. Pringle eyed me speculatively, and I can see that the village is already visualizing a decorous wooing culminating in a quiet wedding at Fairacre Church, with my pupils forming a guard of honor from the south door, with the aged couple hobbling down the path between them. I said that I hoped that now that the poor man had retired, he would be allowed to rest in peace, and went out to clean the car. This is my latest and most extravagant acquisition, a small second-hand Austin in which I hope to be able to have wonderful touring holidays, as well as driving to Caxley on any day of the week instead of relying on the local school bus on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, as before. So far, I have not been out on my own, as I am still having lessons from an imperturbable instructor in Caxley, who thrives on clashing gears, stalling engines, and a beginner's unfortunate confusion of brake and accelerator. Miss Clare, that noble woman, who taught the infants at Fairacre for many years, says that she will come out with me at any time, dear, whether you feel confident or not. I am quite sure that you can master anything. I am touched, but also alarmed at such a faith in my powers, and can only hope that she never meets my driving instructor. Miss Clare spent the evening with me recently, and our conversation turned, as it so often does, to life in Fairacre in the early years of this century, when Miss Clare was a young and inexperienced pupil teacher in this village school. I love to hear her reminiscing, for she has a tolerant and dispassionate outlook on life, born of inner wisdom and years of close contact with the people here. For Miss Clare, to know is to forgive, and I have never yet heard her acting in anger or in fear, or meting out to a child any punishment that was hasty or maliciously devised. Her attitude to those who were in authority over her is as wide and kindly as it always was to the small charges that she recently taught these 40 years. We were talking of Miss Parr, who had died recently. She had been a manager of Fairacre School since the reign of King Edward VII and was a stickler for etiquette. It appears that one day she met Mrs. Willett, now our caretaker's wife, but then a child of 6, in the lane, and was shocked to find the little girl omitted to curtsy to her. At once she took the child to its mother and demanded instant punishment. "But surely," I began to protest. Miss Clare looked calmly at me. "My dear," she said gently, "it was quite understandable. It was customary then for our children to curtsy to the gentry, and Miss Parr was doing her duty as she understood it by correcting the child. No one then questioned her action. Other days, other ways, you know. It's only that now, sometimes, looking back, I wonder." She put down a green pullover she was knitting and stared meditatively at the fire. "When you say that no one questioned the actions of his superiors, do you mean that they were automatically considered right, or that verbal protestations were never made, or what?" I asked her. "We recognized injustice, dear," answered Miss Clare equably, "as clearly as you do. But we bore more in silence, for we had so much more to lose by rebellion. Jobs were hard to come by in those days, and no work meant no food. It was as simple as that. A sharp retort might mean instant dismissal, and perhaps no reference, which might mean months, even years, without a suitable post. No wonder that my poor mother's favorite maxim was civility costs nothing. She knew only too well that civility meant more than that to people like us. It was a vital necessity to a wage earner when we were young." "Was she ever bitter?" "I don't think so. She was a happy, even-tempered woman, and believed that if we did our best in that station to which we were called, then we would do well. After all, we knew our place then. It made for security. And here in Fairacre, the gentry on the whole were kindly and generous to those they employed. You might call it a benevolent despotism, my dear. And you know there are far worse forms of government than that." Miss Clare's eyes twinkled as she resumed her work, and the room was filled again with the measured clicking of her knitting needles. Tuesday was a beast of a day, foggy and cold, with the elm trees dripping into the playground. 2 workmen arrived from Caxley to see to the school skylight over my desk. It must be the 10th time at least that it has received attention since I came here just over 6 years ago. Usually it is Mr. Rogers from the forge who has the job of clambering over the roof, but the managers decided to try Caxley this time, hoping, I imagine, that it might be better done by them. The village, of course, is up in arms at this invasion of foreigners, and Mr. Rogers wears a martyred expression when he stands in the door of his smithy. I am confident that he will soon be in a position to smile again, as the skylight has defied all comers for 70-odd years, so the school logbook says, and I doubt whether any workman, even if hailing from Great Caxley itself, will vanquish it. One man in Mrs. Pringle's hearing said loudly, "It was a proper bodged-up job," so that, of course, that will inflame passions further. Mrs. Pringle, who was scrubbing out the school dustbins at the time, drew in her breath for so long with such violence that I thought she would burst, but only her corsets creaked under the strain. Tea at Miss Clare's was the bright spot of the day. We had a lardy cake, which was wonderfully hot and indigestible, and conversation which was soothing until I was putting on my coat, when Miss Clare shattered me by asking if I had yet met a very nice man, a retired schoolmaster, who had come to live in Miss Parr's old house. I am beginning to feel very, very sorry for this unfortunate man, and have half a mind to ring him up anonymously, advising his early removal from Fairacre if he wishes to have an undisturbed retirement. The last day of the holidays has arrived, and as usual, half the jobs I intended doing have been left undone. No marmalade made, no paint washed down, only the most urgent mending done, and school starts tomorrow. It all looks unbelievably clean over there. I staggered back with the fish tank and Roman hyacinths, all of which have sheltered under my schoolhouse roof for the past fortnight. Miss Gray, Mrs. Annett, I mean, will have a smaller class this term, only 16 on roll, while mine will be 23 strong. The stoves are miracles of jetty brilliance. Mrs. Pringle must have used pounds of blacklead and enough energy to move a mountain to have produced such luster. Woe betide any careless tipper on of coke in the next few days. Term has begun. Everyone is back with the exception of Eileen Burton, who has, according to the note brought by a neighbor's child, a sore throat and a hard, tight chest. Can only hope these afflictions are not infectious. The workmen have found it necessary to remove the whole frame of the skylight so that, having had a clear 2 weeks to do the job undisturbed, they now tell me that we must endure a flapping and smelly tarpaulin over the hole in the roof, while a new window frame is made in Caxley. Straight speaking, though giving me some relief, dints their armor not at all, as all blame attaches, as usual, to other members of the firm, higher up and back in Caxley, miss, so that I can see a few very uncomfortable days ahead. The children appear to have forgotten the very elements of education. 5 times tables elude them altogether, and my request to write January on their own met with tearful mystification. Having walked around the class and seen such efforts as Jamry, Gannergy, and Jennery, I wrote it on the blackboard with dreadful threats of no play for a week to those who did not master its intricacies immediately. The vicar just called before we went home in his habitual winter garb of cloak, beretta, and leopard skin gloves. Surely they can't stand another winter. I only wish I had such a serene outlook as Mr. Partridge's. He greeted us all as though he loved every hair on our heads, as I truly believe he does. I see that he has Jesu lover of my soul on the hymn list this week, but haven't the heart to tell him that I think it painfully lugubrious and quite unsuitable for children to learn. I invited him over to the schoolhouse to tea and ushered him into the dining room, where the clothes horse stood round the fire bearing various intimate articles of apparel and a row of dingy polishing rags which added the final touch of squalor. Not that he, dear man, would have worried even had he noticed the things, but that clothes horse was whisked neatly into the kitchen in record time. I have just returned from a day out with Amy. She rang me up last night to say that there was a wonderful film on which I must see. It would broaden me. It was about real life. I said that I'd looked through the Caxley Chronicle this week, but I thought that both cinemas were showing westerns. Caxley! Screamed Amy down the wire. Did I think of nothing but Caxley and Fairacre? When she thought of what promise I had shown as a girl, it quite upset her to see how I'd gone off. No, the film she had in mind was to be shown in a London suburb, a cinema specializing in revivals, and this was a quite wonderful chance to see this unique masterpiece. She would pick me up at 10:30, give me lunch, and bring me back to the wilds again. I mentally pulled my forelock and said that would be lovely. Amy's car is magnificent and has a fluid flywheel which, as a gear-crashing learner, filled me with a horrid envy. We soared up the hills, passing everything in sight, while Amy told me that life, even for a happily married woman, was not always rosy. James, although utterly devoted, of course, was at a dangerous age. Not that he was inattentive, only last week he gave her these gloves. She raised a gargantuan fur-clad paw, and the week before that these earrings. I bent forward to admire a cluster of turquoises. And this brooch was his Christmas present and was fantastically expensive, but she found she was beginning to suspect the reason for so many costly presents, especially when he had been away from home on business so frequently lately. I said, "Why don't you ask him if there's anyone else?" Amy said that was so like me. It wasn't surprising that I stayed single when I was so unwomanly and unsubtle. No, she could handle this thing quite skillfully, she thought, and in any case it was her duty to stick by dear James through thick and thin. Unworthy thoughts crossed my mind as to whether she'd stick so nobly if James suddenly became penniless. We arrived in the West End. Amy had no difficulty in finding a car park with an obsequious attendant who directed our footsteps to the hotel where Amy had booked a table. I was much impressed by the opulence of this establishment and said so. Amy shrugged nonchalantly. "Not a bad little dump," she said, then, scanning the menu. "James brings me here when he wants to be quick. The food is just eatable." We ordered ham and tongue with salad, which Amy insisted on having mixed at our table, supervising the rubbing of the bowl with garlic, which I detest, but I could see I must endure, the exact number of drops of oil, etc., and expressing horror that the whole was not being turned with wooden implements. I would much rather have had my salad fresh and be allowed to ask for Heinz mayonnaise in constant use at my home, but realized that Amy was enjoying every minute of this worldly woman taking out country mouse act, and would not have spoiled it for her for worlds. Over lunch, Amy continued to tell me about James's generosity and disclosed the monthly allowance which he gives her. This, she said, she just manages on. As the sum exceeds easily my own modest monthly check as headmistress, I felt inclined to remind her of our early days together teaching in a large junior school not many miles from this hotel, where we thrived cheerfully on a salary of just over £13 a month and visited the theater, the cinema, went skating and dancing, dressed attractively, and best of all, were as merry as grigs all the time. As Amy's guest, however, I was bound to keep these memories to myself. As I watched her picking over her salad discontentedly, I remembered vividly a meal we had had together in those far-off days. It must have been towards the end of the month, for I know we spent a long and hilarious time working out from the menu which would fill us up more for 8pence, baked beans and 2 sausages, or spaghetti on toast. The cinema was rather hard to find in an obscure cul-de-sac, and the film, which Amy had particularly come to see, had just begun. It was so old that it seemed to be raining all the time, and even the bedroom scenes, which were far too frequent for my peace of mind, were seen as through a downpour. The women's hairstyles were unbelievable and quite succeeded in distracting my grasshopper mind from the plot, either puffed out at the sides like the chorus in the Mikado, or cut in a thick fringe just across the eyebrows, giving the most brutish aspect to the ladies of the cast. Waistlines were low and busts incredibly high, evidently when this film first saw light. The supporting film was of later vintage, but if anything, heavier going. Played by Irish actors in Irish countryside in Irish weather, and spoken in such a clotted hodgepodge of Irish idiom as to be barely intelligible. It dealt with the flight of a young man from the cruel English, bogs, mist, mountains, girls with shawls over their heads and bare feet splashing through puddles, open coffins surrounded with candles, and keening, wrinkled old women, all flickered before us for an hour and a half. And then the poor dear was shot in the end. We emerged into the gray London twilight with our eyes swollen. Drawn together by our emotional afternoon, we had tea in a much more relaxed mood than lunch, and drove back in a pleasant, nostalgic atmosphere of ancient memories shared. It was good of Amy to take me out. A day away from Fairacre in the middle of January is a real tonic, but I was sorry to see her so unhappy. I hope that I am not so wrong-headed as to blame Amy's recent affluence for her present malaise. As anyone of sense knows, money is a blessing, and I dearly wish I had more, a lot more. I should have flowers in the classroom and my house all the year round, buy 100 or so books which have been on my list for years, and spend every school holiday traveling abroad just for a start. I think the truth of the matter is that Amy feels useless and has little to do. She used to be a first-class teacher and was able to draw wonderful pictures on the blackboard that were the envy of us all, I remember. And we will continue our way through January and see if Miss Reed has any plans for Amy next time.